Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. The plague of anti-black racism is nationwide, and no place in America has a monopoly on it, but the South in general, and Louisiana in specific, is uniquely evil mainly because the racists down there found ways to hide their evil in plain sight. And the racism has been enshrined in its so-called law enforcement facilities, which are the chief apparatus that carries it out. Take, for instance, Angola State Penitentiary. It used to be a plantation, and it's still used for that very purpose to this very day. Angola has been using its prisoners as forced labor for many of the biggest corporations on earth, like McDonald's and Cargill, which is America's largest private company, and of course no list of degenerate corporations would be complete without Walmart. And this isn't the first time that Walmart's been embroiled in something like this. Some of you may remember that Walmart got caught several years back having hundreds of illegal aliens working for it. The feds caught them red-handed, but they said there would be no criminal charges because the corrupt executives at Walmart were, quote, cooperating, and promised they would take strong action to prevent this in the future. By the way, next time you have a brush with the law, go ahead and tell the authorities that you want to cooperate, and you'll take strong action to prevent your criminality in the future. See how well that works out for you. Now, that incident with Walmart was a one-off, and when the feds found out, they stopped it, eventually. But where the treatment of black people in America is concerned, they aren't even saying boo about it. This is modern-day slavery, and the pool is pretty much entirely black prisoners forced to work on farms and slaughterhouses, among other industries. They work for pennies or often nothing at all, and this is big business. You have the slave labor forced to work for the enrichment of such companies and brands as Frosted Flakes, Ballpark hot dogs, Tyson Foods, Gold Medal flour, Coca-Cola, Riceland, and those products wind up at the biggest retailers on earth, like Walmart, Kroger's, Target, Aldi, and Whole Foods. And understand something. Kroger's owns a lot of supermarket chains like Ralph's, Dillon's, Smith's, King Soopers, Fry's, QFC, City Market, Owens, JC, Payless, Baker's, Gerb's, Harris Teeter, Pick and Save, Metro Market, and Mariano's. See, Kroger's has quietly been taking over the grocery store industry in America, and they did it by buying out their competitors, but not changing the names of the stores. So people still think that their favorite Ralph's is locally owned, but it's not. So when they say Kroger's, we're not just talking about Kroger's stores specifically. It also includes all those supermarket chains that they bought up over the years. And you got Frosted Flakes, that's owned by the Kellogg's Corporation. Go back in the archives on this channel and check out the reparations series that I did a couple of years back. As part of that, I dealt with the universities and their ties to slavery and eugenics. One of the big financial contributors to Yale's eugenics program was John Henry Kellogg, the man who started Kellogg's cereal. And to this day, his company is still making money off the dehumanization and destruction of black people. Perhaps Tony the Tiger should adopt a new slogan: slavery, it's great! And you got Whole Foods, the company that charges outrageous prices for their food because they claim that it's all organic or something. They made their money appealing to cash-fluid suburban and white middle-class types. I know some of you may be on a health kick, so next time you go to Whole Foods, you can think about where some of their stuff comes from. The meat from the livestock raised by those Angola prisoners wound up in the country's biggest fast food chains, supermarkets, and meat exporters, including Sam's Club, Tyson Foods, and Burger King. And speaking of Burger King, some incarcerated workers with just a few months or years left on their sentences have been made to work at restaurant chains like Burger King, as well as major retail stores and meat processing plants. Unlike work crews picking up litter in orange jumpsuits, they go largely unnoticed, often wearing the same uniforms as their civilian counterparts. So when you go to Burger King, you might want to ask yourself, are the people there just working for slave wages, or are they slaves of the state too? But it doesn't stop there. Many of these products of this prison slave labor are exported to foreign countries, including countries which claim to block products from the U.S. made with prison labor. So just as during chattel slavery, everyone's getting rich off of our enslavement. They'll lie and claim that they aren't, but when you follow the money, you see there's a whole lot of people who are in on it. Now, how is this allowed to happen? These companies are violating their own so-called policies by even doing this, but as we all know, corporate rules only apply to employees. Everything else is just words. Though as black people, we know exactly why this is legal. It's because slavery in America was never abolished. All the government did was to outlaw private sector slavery. So, Sam White could no longer own slaves, but Uncle Sam or some other state law enforcement agency could, and that's exactly what they've been doing for 150 years. All they have to do is merely accuse you of a crime, and they can coerce you into forced labor. This has been going on nonstop since the alleged end of chattel slavery, and the U.S. government has been giving it a wink and a nod because this is state policy. In fact, you don't even have to be a prisoner to be forced into slave labor. As the AP reports, some people arrested in Alabama are put to work even before they've been convicted. An unusual work release program accepts pretrial defendants, allowing them to avoid jail while earning bond money. But with multiple fees deducted from their salaries, that can take time. See, that's what you call debt peonage. For people who try to claim that there's no debtors' prisons in the U.S., that's a lie, just like saying there's no slavery in the U.S. And like any form of slavery, they make sure that there's harsh punishments to make certain that nobody thinks about not complying. Those who refuse can find their chances for parole taken away and be sent to solitary confinement. But that's only the beginning of the strong-arm tactics they use. One former Angola prisoner spent 51 years enslaved in Angola. He witnessed men working with little or no water and passing out in triple-digit heat. Just as during slavery, the black prisoners would throw down their tools, knowing full well what the consequences would be. As Mr. Ingram put it, they'd come, maybe 4 in the truck, shields over their face, billy clubs, and they'd beat you right there in the field. They'd beat you, handcuff you, and beat you again. Mr. Ingram protested his innocence for his entire incarceration. He pleaded guilty to a crime he says he didn't commit, and he only pleaded because prosecutors told him that he would serve 10.5 years and avoid a death penalty if he did. Instead, they kept him locked up for half a century. Another former prisoner, Calvin Thomas, gave an account that reflected Mr. Ingram's. Mr. Thomas said anyone who refused to work or who didn't produce enough or who merely stepped outside of the long rows of crops would be punished. Quote, "If he shoots the gun in the air because you done passed that line, that means you're going to get locked up and you're going to have to pay for that bullet that he shot." Thomas also added that some days were so blisteringly hot, the guards' horses would collapse. And these accounts sound like they came straight out of the slave narratives, don't they? Sounds like something you would have heard from some black folks who were liberated from those plantations. But of course, these are the slave narratives because slavery never stopped. That's why the stories are no different. And because we let politicians and bootlicks and self-serving sellouts tell us, oh, things have changed, we con ourselves into believing that slavery is over when it's not. This is what's going on right now in America and has been going on for 150 years. What nobody talks about is how much these companies pay to these politicians, both Democrat and Republican, in the form of campaign donations to make sure that this process continues, and how many of these politicians have family members who are given patronage jobs at these corporations. How many of these racist sheriffs and prison wardens own stock in these companies that they compel slave labor for? How many of the politicians do? How many of these judges who hand down these long sentences and prosecutors are also involved? All of these people are not just keeping all of these black folks enslaved for nothing. They're doing it because they get paid off of it. Farms and slaughterhouses are just the beginning, though. This slave labor is forced to work on everything from mattresses to solar panels. Those of you who bought a bed recently or who got solar panels installed on your roof because you get tax rebates for it, you might want to ask about the high price of those tax rebates, and if the people who you bought these things from can certify that they weren't made with prison labor. The ACLU put out a report saying that the slave labor tied to these goods and services brought in more than $2 billion in 2021 alone, and that doesn't even count the money from work release and other programs from local jails. Joe Biden's crime bill, along with other legal measures over the decades, has fueled and turbocharged America's prison industrial complex, which is and has always been part of the corporate industrial complex. And of course, the government gets their cut in the form of taxes for this ill-gotten gain. This is nationwide, and these are partnerships between corporations and governments. It's nationwide, including in Nikki Haley's state of South Carolina, but of course, she doesn't think America's a racist country. Sure, the people, the businesses, and the government are racist as hell, but that doesn't mean anything. And yeah, they're carrying on slavery right up to the present, but that doesn't mean anything either. That's not racist, mind you. This is why we need reparations. The evils that we were subjected to never stopped. Anyone who tells you that, like Nikki Haley, is lying. This is why we're owed reparations, and anyone who tries to get our vote or anything else from us without paying this is illegitimate and doesn't deserve consideration, much less our support. And that includes these bootlicks who are out here campaigning for them. Your Congressional Black Caucus has been seeing all of this happen. Cedric Richmond, who was in the Biden administration, he's from Louisiana, South Louisiana, in fact. He's from right down there where all this has been happening. And what's he said about it? While Biden was talking about so-called criminal justice reform, did anyone mention this? Did Cedric Richmond? Has the Congressional Black Caucus? This is the devil's bargain you have to make with white supremacy when you choose to become a bootlick. You have to pledge to offer up Black America as a human sacrifice for a plate of butter biscuits. You shouldn't have to have these prisoners, though former slaves would be more accurate, filing class action lawsuits against this, but they are. There should be legislation pending about this decades ago. Instead of asinine displays like that sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives, they should be doing sit-ins to stop the ongoing slave trade happening right here in the U.S. But then again, how would you expect the people who wrote the laws and who defend the system to actually tear it down? You don't have to go to the third world to find people enslaved and pressed into forced labor. You got it going on right here. And these worthless sellouts you see telling us to vote for Biden are doing nothing about it and saying nothing about it. Oh, but they want for us to vote for Biden because he's going to improve things. He just isn't doing it now or ever. The system of slave labor that powers these corporations and flows upwards to these political parties is also the same economic rewards that the black misleadership class in D.C. looks for too. Well, we don't look for it and we're not dependent on it. And even if they offered us money, we wouldn't take 1 red cent. There's no amount of money that can justify or make me compromise on slavery, and I know you feel the same way. I want you to remember what's going on. When we talk about reparations, it's not simply about things that happened 150 years ago. It is about the continuing enslavement and brutalization of black people going on right up to the present. Well, we're not going to let anyone forget about this. No matter what this white supremacist injustice system may accuse these black prisoners of, we recognize that protecting and continuing anti-black racism is the greatest crime of all. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Stephen 12, Wesley Jones, Rose Arnold, Anthony Pollard, and Williams. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.